Hi there. I'm NightDocs. Obviously, not my real name, but that's just kind of what I go by. This is NightDocs. I am kind of a brand new channel on YouTube. Started about a couple months ago. My channel officially launched October 27th on 2019, and I'm just pretty new around here, but I did about a little under a month ago release a 49-minute documentary about David Parker Ray, the toy box killer. And I've been pretty happy with how it turned out, and it seems to have a pretty good reception so far.
Absolutely. Can you give a short synopsis about David Parker Ray, his story, what you have uncovered?
Sure. So, David Parker Ray is a I say suspected serial killer. He absolutely was a serial killer. He just was never actually convicted of murder in a court of law, but police believe he is responsible for up to 60 murders throughout his lifetime. He killed mainly women from the 1950s all the way up until about 1999 when he was caught. And what makes David Parker Ray so interesting, and what makes him so interesting really is the fact that he went to such great lengths to inflict pain on his victims. You hear a lot about serial killers at large, and it's usually kind of a spooky tale, where you've got somebody who's killing people, and it's always a horrifying thing to read about. But the thing is, more often than not, most times when there's a serial killer, killing these innocent people, the situation is that these people don't suffer for very long, at least relatively speaking, and it's over. Whereas with David Parker Ray, one of the reasons his case is, in particular, is so horrifying, and I honestly can't believe he is not one of the most, if not the most famous serial killer of all time after looking into him. He built, and the reason he's called the toy box killer, he built a custom torture chamber that he kept on his property. It was a 22-foot long cargo trailer. It's a white cargo trailer, and he invested, police estimate, probably around $100,000 into it over the years. He started building it in, I think it was 1986, and he was using it for about 13 years. And he would kidnap women from various circumstances. It could be a prostitute off the street. It could be just somebody walking down the highway. It could be somebody that was met in a bar. He would find ways to either kidnap or lure people to his home, where they would be bound, shackled, and introduced to the toy box, which is just a horrifying. It's just a horrifying place to be. That really rivals anything that you would ever read about in like the Dark Ages or something. I mean, he had one of the most horrifying element that he had in there was an actual full-on gynecological chair that you would see at a gynecologist that he retrofitted for his own uses, where it had shackles on it and there were electrodes installed all over it so that he could electrocute women, and he would bound them and tie them up and restrain them into this gynecological chair and just torture them for days on end, sometimes up to months. Like, a lot of times he would keep these women for up to 3 months at a time. It was just absolutely horrifying. What I didn't go into a whole lot in the documentary that I really wish I would have hammered home a little bit more was the fact that he was kind of an unparalleled craftsman, that he was able to customize and build his own torture devices and all these elaborate systems of tracks and pulleys and things like that, where he could suspend his victims in midair. I mean, it was kind of evil genius in the way that he was able to set this up.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the angle that because he had accomplices, he had his girlfriend working for him, his daughter, his daughter's
Yeah.
friend. He was, like you said, making specialized bondage equipment, and he was selling that through the mail.
Yeah. So he made quite a bit of money. You know, his day job was that he was a park ranger. So obviously that's not going to pay a ton. I mean, you know, government employees, they're paid a modest amount of money, and he was in a relatively high position in the New Mexico Park Services. So he was able to, you know, make a good enough income to you know, live whatever lifestyle he was living. But the real money it seems like that he made was, you know, over the years, from like his late 20s all the way up until 1999, he was always working and establishing contacts in this secretive underground kind of a bondage community. And in that community, there were people that were especially interested in really extreme stuff that went kind of beyond the pale of what you would normally find within BDSM communities and things like that, that were more interested in actual real life violence and people who, now, I'm not personally familiar with the BDSM world. It's just not my not my thing. But you know, from what I understand, you know, that particular kink is, a lot of times there are elements that it's simulated abduction and simulated rape and things like that you know, you would normally find abhorrent in society. But you know, everybody's got their own interests and that kind of stuff, and I don't really judge. But what he did, and what a lot of the people in this kind of underground community were into, there was an element of it seems like, where people were interested in removing the illusion and wanting to make it real for them. And he evidently made quite a bit of money by selling a lot of custom-made devices that he would make. The instances where he was kidnapping and torturing women inside his toy box, as he called it, he would actually sell the footage. So he recorded just about every session, police believe, and he would sell this footage to his underground network of contacts in that community. And I don't know how much he was making off of that, but you know, today there's a market for that kind of stuff on the dark web. And this is 1999, and well before that, far before there was really a dark web, so to speak, where people would be buying and selling and producing this kind of stuff over the internet anyway. And so you know, it was basically a mail order business that he did, that he was able to stay off the radar. So to this day, there's most likely lots and lots of tapes that are out there in the world, that police don't have their hands on, including one particular tape that would be really good to get for the police to get their hands on, where there was one particular woman named Marie Parker, who is an ex-girlfriend of Roy Yancey, who is one of David Parker Ray's accomplices. David Parker Ray had Roy Yancey murder her, and evidently it was right on camera. And he evidently, you know, the tape is gone, and it's assumed that it got sold to one of David Parker Ray's contacts in the bondage community. But they found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tapes on property when they first arrested him and started investigating his home.
There was also found like a little black book with the letters RICOH.
Yeah, I saw that, and I'll be honest, I discovered the existence of that pretty late into my research, and at the point that I was at in my research, I already had kind of a narrative that that I really wanted to go with, and there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of elements to the case that aren't covered in the documentary, not only for time issues, because I wanted to keep it under an hour anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's why you're invited on the podcast.
What's that?
That's why you're invited on the podcast. So
yeah,
that's good news.
well, yeah, I'm happy to talk about everything that I do know.
Hey.
As far as the Black Book, I did figure out the existence of that. I don't know what really came of that. I didn't look super deeply into that, but it was certainly one of those things where I was like, well, that would probably be really interesting to dig into to see what kind of contacts were gleaned from it. And the fact that nothing's happened since they found that black book leads me to believe that, maybe it wasn't quite as helpful as you would think on the surface of just knowing that it exists,
Mm-hmm.
I do get the sense that a lot of people had no idea what was going on, and a lot of people referred to his toy box as David's workshop. And it seems like to a lot of people, what David Parker Ray was doing was kind of an open secret, which makes you kind of wonder what the involvement was of people that were keeping that secret, and why they would. And is it possible that when he moved to Elephant Butte, it was because he was moving there with some other people that that were kind of partakers in this same kind of violence that he was into? I have no evidence to back that up, just forewarning. I mean, I'm just kind of speculating and all that. I don't really get into a lot of conspiracy theory stuff, really. It's just, if that was what happened, it wouldn't surprise me.
No, it was like a very drug-induced town, right?
Oh yeah, lots of drugs. But there's a big difference between. There's a pretty big leap between being into drugs and being into kidnapping and torturing and raping and all that. Dozens and dozens of women.
What do you make of the fact that there was like a satellite transmitter next to the toy box?
Well, back in that day, satellite TV was definitely a thing. Looks like it was a satellite for something. I mean, I don't know if he had satellite TV or anything, but I mean, that's kind of what I assumed when I saw it.
Have you heard about his former boss, Billy Ray Bauer?
Yes, I have. So Billy Ray Bowers was a man who, about 10 years before David Parker Ray's arrest, went missing. And I'm trying to remember all the details right now. I'd have to go back over my notes, but from what I remember, the story went something like he went out fishing or something like that, never returned, and when he did turn up years later, I think they had already ruled his death a suicide or something like that. Evidently, when he was found, his body was floating in Elephant Butte Lake, and he evidently had a couple of gunshot wounds in the back of his head. And although it was initially ruled a suicide, evidently with the arrest of David Parker Ray, they started looking into it as a possible homicide, with David Parker Ray as a prime suspect, but I don't know if they were ever able to definitively make a confirmed link between David Parker Ray and Billy Ray Bowers. And they've been able to come up with some theories on what the motive could have been for David Parker Ray killing Billy Ray Bowers, but nothing's ever been able to be concretely proven. But I am personally in the camp that David Parker Ray most likely killed Billy Ray Bowers for sure.
What do you make of Roy Yancey was into the occult? I can also remember that one time Halloween was cancelled and True the Consequences because people were cats were being strangled and desecrating of cemetery graves.
Yeah, that's a section I go into in the documentary where Roy Yancey, as a teenager, he was kind of a renegade as a high schooler. He ran with a pretty spooky crowd that a lot of people considered it kind of a pseudo-satanic cult. And what you're saying is right, where he was running around town with his friends, and they would sacrifice pets of neighbors and people around town. He did something to his principal. I can't remember what it was. But I mean, there was all sorts of havoc that they wreaked all over town. him and his friends, and evidently David Parker Ray was into the occultist Satanism stuff too, and so was Cindy Hendy after they introduced her to it, and they taught her like some black magic type stuff, and I struggle a little bit with the Satanism element of all of this because it's hard to really tell definitively how much of it was them trying to just be edgy and different, and that it was a close, like it I think I say in the documentary, it's unclear if it was simply if it was like strongly held beliefs, or if it was simply theatrics to complement their taste for bondage and BDSM. I mean, it seems like a natural type of thing to be into if you're into the really extreme versions of that kind of stuff. So I don't know if the Satanism element was like a really strongly held belief system, or if it was just kind of edgy whatever stuff that they were really into to be dark and different, and they thought it was cool or something like that. Because I mean, I was in high school, and there were kids like that when I was in high school too, that claimed to be Satanists and stuff like that. And I mean, it just now they're accountants,
yeah,
with that are every Sunday attenders at their local parish for whatever church they go to. I don't know. I'm just saying, what you're doing in high school, it's kind of hard to lend credibility to somebody's. If somebody has a really strong belief system that's that out there and extreme, it's kind of hard to lend a lot of credibility as a core part of who they really are when they're in high school,
Yeah, but I think in comparison with his whole toy box and the things that were found inside, and his remarks on the audio tapes that he describes himself as a dungeon master.
And that's where I bring up the comments that I don't know. I mean, it very well could be that they were strongly held beliefs, that they believed in occultist Satanism, and that was a part of their identity, But I mean, I also find it equally believable that it was theatrics. I find both equally believable personally.
Yep. What do you know about a guy named Kenneth Lee Lane from Florida?
So Kenneth Lane his story's kind of short in the research that I did, and I didn't dig into a lot of his backstory, just because I was kind of focused on telling the story of just the crimes in general and David Parker Ray himself. But from what I gather, he was kind of a lonely, sort of loner guy that moved to, I think it was Truth or Consequences from Florida. He was evidently a pretty flamboyant gay man that was that moved to a town that small to kind of escape whatever he was coming from. I don't know what his past was really like. He was evidently pretty into drugs, which were pretty easy to come by in Truth or Consequences, and it seems like he might have been dealing quite a bit of it as well, because both Jesse Ray and Roy Yancey used to come to him for supplies of some drugs. I don't know what drugs those could have been. I didn't really get that far, but it does seem like he did supply some of those drugs to them, and it seems implied in the research that I did, but not overtly stated, that evidently Kenneth Lane and Roy Yancey had some kind of sexual relationship as well. Roy Yancey, throughout this story, he seems to be right down the middle on, he was most likely a bisexual, or probably still is, I don't know, because he had relationships with both men and women, and it seems apparent to me that one of those might have been Kenneth Lane. And anyway, Kenneth Lane, I wasn't able to find a lot of information on the events really leading up to it, but evidently after Roy Yancey and Jesse Ray had been visiting him for quite a while. Those visits stopped, and then weeks go by, I guess, and one of Kenneth Lane's neighbors started complaining about a really foul smell coming from Kenneth Lane's apartment, and so they called the landlord or the police or both. I don't really know which. But anyway, when they got in, they found his pretty progressively decomposed body in the front room, and the police didn't really know what to do with it really, but they performed an autopsy on him, and they ruled his death a suicide because his stomach was full of screws and bolts and stuff like that, and there was a doorknob that was lodged in his rectum. And then, so they declared it a suicide. And then later on, the landlord had the apartment cleaned out because obviously they're going to need to renovate that and get it ready for whoever is going to occupy the space next, and there's obviously quite a bit of stuff you got to take care of when somebody's died in an apartment like that. Anyway, when they were doing the work to clean up the place, they discovered that there were like pentagrams drawn, or I don't know if they were drawn or carved into the table in the room that he was in. They found black candles, splashes of blood all over the place. I mean, to me, it seems really apparent that he was murdered in some kind of sort of occultist ritual. Now, I'm not familiar enough with stuff like Satanism or anything to know if there's anything to do with those kind of rituals and ingesting metal like screws or bolts or things like that. So I don't know if that was part of it, but it does seem apparent that he was murdered, and it either coincided or followed some kind of satanic activity, though.
What do you make of the fact that his daughter Jessie Ray went to the police in June 1986?
Yeah,
for her father.
So Jessie Ray's only time of ever cooperating with law enforcement. Yeah. So Jessie Ray, David Parker Ray's daughter, she was exposed from the get-go, really. I mean, David Parker Ray kind of moved out and did a whole bunch of stuff on his own, left the family for a little bit, and then he came back. But when he came back, he didn't really do anything to hide the kind of stuff he was into from his daughter. So she knew full well from a really young age what her father was up to. And, you know, when you're any environment that you're raised in, you know, that becomes your norm. That becomes your normal. So she was used to seeing her dad, you know, getting into bondage and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, that's her life, you know? And so she didn't really see anything wrong with it. And then around the age of 19, there was one particular session that got really violent where he had a prostitute off the streets or something in his home, and she saw her screaming, running naked out of the house, and it was evidently a pretty violent bondage session. I guess that's what we'll call it. I don't know if she was there willingly or not. Doesn't seem like she was. But after that, she decided to make a formal complaint to the FBI about her father. I guess she'd been thinking about it for a little while, but evidently this was kind of the catalyst. And she sat down, told him about everything that her father was up to. And the thing is, you know, David Parker Ray was very careful about some things. And one of the things that he was pretty careful about was the type of victims that he chose. And, you know, when your victims a lot of times are prostitutes, things like that, it's going to be hard to lend those type of people as much credibility as you would others, especially in the 1980s. I mean, you know, we didn't live in quite the progressive society that we do now, where you listen to victims a little more often. And I'm sure even today, you know, somebody like a street worker or a sex worker, would have a hard time establishing credibility when reporting a crime, but especially then, I think. I mean, I really am just speculating here, but anyway, the Jessie Ray, she gave a full complaint to the FBI, and what sucks is the FBI couldn't do anything really with the information. They investigated him a little bit. They even brought him in for questioning, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm into this stuff," and he told them in graphic detail all the stuff he was into, and he even said something along the lines of that it was hard for him to even ejaculate if he wasn't thinking of murder or something horrifically violent, and they couldn't do anything. They didn't have a victim to establish a case on. They knew generally what he was up to, but they just couldn't do anything, and they closed the case after a little while, which is just, I mean, hindsight, it's really easy to, judge and say, oh my gosh, they should have surveilled him 24/7. But, I mean, law enforcement, I mean, even the FBI, there's only so much resources to go around. And we don't know that they weren't keeping an eye on him really once in a while. But, if there isn't anything specific that they can pin on him, what do you do when there's other bad guys out there that they need to catch? So it was a difficult situation for them, I'm sure, and the public has been outraged ever since Jessie Ray's confession that nothing got done, and in a way, I think rightly so. But at the same time, hindsight gives you much clearer vision than what you have at the time. And I don't know to what extent they really knew what they had on their hands. And I don't know also, for example, how much they believed it. For example, there was another victim that escaped besides Cynthia Vigil, and she escaped and told an undercover cop what was going on, and he didn't believe her just because, I mean, think of the situation. A guy with $100,000 torture chamber who kidnaps women for days, sometimes months on end, turns them loose after he brainwashes them and drugs them and stuff. I mean, it's so insane. It's like, I mean, how do you even take that seriously? Like, the only reason we could take it seriously now is because it obviously happened. But I mean, just take a step back and just imagine how crazy and insane and how improbable that sounds,
What do you make of the fact that she also said that he was actually selling them to buyers in Mexico? That also lets some credence that he had some connections.
Yeah, so I don't know where the evidence came from of that. I think it was mostly based off of eyewitness testimony of what they heard David Parker Ray say, and it would definitely explain another stream of income that he had that would fund a lot of his activities, especially building the toy box itself. So that evidently, it seems like this is what he was doing before he built the toy box. I don't know if he was doing it after he built the toy box, but it seems like he was definitely doing it before, where he would kidnap women, torture them, and to cover his tracks, he would take them across the border in Mexico, only a 2-hour drive south, and sell them into sexual slavery. And I don't know how he established contacts to make that happen. I don't know how often he made that happen. But it certainly seems like that may have been the case, but nobody's ever been able to find direct evidence that he actually did do that. It's just kind of one of those things that people say he told them. So it's difficult to know what he was saying, and to know if he was being truthful or if he was just bragging. And I don't know. I really don't know. I don't really have a problem believing that it happened, but I wish there was some evidence that actually backed it up rather than hearsay.
Yeah. Have you also encountered rumors about sadistic parties held by the David Parker Ray And there were like state park observers and law enforcement.
Yeah, evidently he used to hold some of these on his boat out on the lake. I'm sure he did it in his home as well, but I heard a couple of specific stories about him with his bondage friends going out on a sailboat, and they would have what they considered a pretty grand old time out there in the middle of the lake on his boat. I don't know much details on exactly what happened, but knowing David Parker Ray's activities, it's not difficult to draw your own conclusion there. But it certainly seems like it was pretty dark stuff that was going on his boat out on Elephant Butte Lake.
But who were in attendance?
There were rumors, but I don't know how true it is, or if it was just rumors that were circulating around town, that there were some local government officials, some local prominent people that were there. I don't know any names specifically. I'm pretty sure Roy Yancey and Jesse Ray were in attendance at some of these. Certainly Jesse Ray, anyway. Jesse Ray was in on almost all of it. But as far as specific names, I don't know. And as far as them being government officials or local prominent people or anything like that, it's difficult to know if it was just town gossip or if it was if there was any truth behind it.
Did you read that in one of your books or your own personal investigation?
Yeah. It was talked about in Cries in the Desert. Yeah.
Okay, I haven't read that one. Okay.
It's a really good book, man. It's really well put together, and it does a good job of presenting the facts in an entertaining read, which gives you a lot of context and story behind a lot of the different cases. And there were a lot of other victims that it even goes into that I didn't have time to go through in my documentary as well. There's just a lot of people that were affected by this.
I can remember law enforcement saying that actually the inside of the house was actually like almost the same as the toy box. So
not quite, but there were a lot of elements that were similar. Yeah, like so he had a lot of torture equipment inside the house, but the difference between what was in the house itself and the toy box is that the toy box was specially designed for that activity, whereas his house had kind of a dual use. Now, there were still pulleys and chains and tracks on the ceiling in his house, and there were chains on the bed, and they had items all around the house to electrocute and torture, and they had the ankle spreader and the knee spreader bars inside the house, and the spiked sex toys and stuff. I mean, there's all that stuff inside the house as well. But the house was also the living quarters as well, so it wasn't exclusively designed for that. It seems like the toy box was specially designed for those activities, and that's pretty much exclusively what went on in there, whereas the house, it was kind of, as I said, dual use.
But for anyone who was entering the house, they could observe like instantly that there was some kind of a sexual element to these people.
It seems like it. I don't know how much. I don't know if they, for example, if they had people that wouldn't understand over. I don't know if they had a way of like hiding that kind of stuff, or like, for example, when Cynthia Vigil escaped, and the cops came over to the house and found all the stuff lying all over the place, and the torture sex toys and all the other stuff that were lying around. I would actually be curious to know if that stuff was out and about everywhere because they had an active captive victim at the time. or if it was out there. I don't know if it was always out there or if it was just brought out when they had a captive in their custody. So, because I have to believe that there were people that sometimes came to David Parker Ray's house that had no idea what he was actually up to. I mean, it's just, I find it impossible to believe that the entire town knew exactly what was going on and nobody said anything, because that's just unbelievable to me. So there had to have been some way for him to kind of clean his mess up or whatever if somebody was over that they didn't want knowing what he was up to.
Have you heard about any rumors that he was actually linked to some prominent people in politics and state officials, that he was actually like a cousin of them?
You know, that's something we talked about in terms of who was in attendance at his boat parties, and you know, there's some rumors of it, but it's difficult to know what's true and what's being sensationalized and what's purely fiction. You know, I don't know.
Can you
wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if it was true, but I haven't seen any evidence.
Can you please elaborate what you have read in Christ in the Desert, what they came up with?
So they imply it. They do. It's certainly implied that he was connected to some prominent politicians and things like that. But you know, it's kind of a blip on the radar in terms of the book. The book really talks more about the known facts. So it's difficult to. And I think that was a wise choice, because the minute you start talking about stuff that isn't confirmed, just rumored, the more down the conspiracy route you go, and then you're just, I don't know. For me, it makes it harder for me to find the rest of the sources credible if you can't separate the facts from the hearsay. Because because the problem with conspiracy theories in general is that you start with the narrative you want to tell, and then you try and line up the facts in a way to tell the story of how you get there. And what you do is you've established the possibility that it happened, but not the probability.
What do you think of the fact that Cindy Handy is being released?
It was infuriating. It was July this year. She served half of her sentence. And not only did she serve, and what's crazy is the timing of it all. She was sentenced and started serving her prison term before the mandatory minimum sentencing laws came into effect, where you have to serve, I think it's 75% of your time if you are convicted of a violent offense. So she was eligible for parole about halfway through her sentence, and she was just flat out released. I don't think she has any supervision by the state or anything like that, and it's just absolutely infuriating. I don't know where she is to this day. I can't imagine she's having an easy time getting any employment or anything like that. No idea, but I mean, it's absolutely egregious that she's free, though.
But Roy Yancey was still in prison, right?
No, Roy Yancey's free. Roy Yancey's free, man.
Since when was he free?
I'd have to check my dates here. Roy Yancey, I want to say it was like either 2011 or 2014.
And Jesse Ray got immunity.
Jesse Ray was freed as soon as he entered his guilty plea. As soon as David Parker Ray entered his guilty plea, it was in exchange for her basically getting time served, and she had a period of time of probation. I can't remember off the top of my head how long it was, but to this day, she's out and about. She's free. She's got absolutely no supervision by the state at all.
Really weird.
So Cindy Hendy, she was released July 15th, 2019, and she's free. Roy Yancey was released on parole in 2011, He's actually even active on social media.
But how is it possible? Because he confessed killing Mary Parker.
Marie Parker, yeah. He was convicted of second-degree murder.
Oh, okay.
And first-degree conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced in 1999. He was sentenced to 25 years, but as soon as he was eligible for parole, he was out. Going back to Cindy Hendy really quick, what is equally as infuriating about her being released so early, she had a ton of infractions of going against the rules in prison. She had a whole bunch of instances where she had contraband, including drugs, during her sentence. And I mean, just any one of those infractions would land you tons more time in prison, but they just they just let her out.
Do you also have something to add, what you think is interesting, or like an unanswered question, or something to elaborate?
I think the most important thing to really keep in mind is that there are dozens of victims that are alive today that have no idea that they're victims. They're most likely suffering from some really horrific psychological trauma that they can't explain. And I just hope that they can someday connect the missing time that they have in their life to their stay in Truth or Consequences or Elephant Butte or New Mexico in general or whatever. I mean, he got his victims from all over the place. He got them from New Mexico, from Arizona, from just multiple states that were surrounding him. So it's possible that anybody within 8 to 10 hour drive from 513 Bass Road that have a very distinct line in their life where they were fine and happy and regular people, and then just started missing some time, and now they're suffering from some psychological trauma that they can't explain. It's heartbreaking to think about, and that's what my thoughts go to the most about this case, are the people that are alive today that have no idea that they're victims. They can't explain the missing time in their lives. They can't explain where they were for so long, and the mental health issues that they developed after a very specific amount of time. It's so heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, I also added the FBI artifacts on the website, that you can see like dozens and dozens of jewelry, and it's just unidentified still to the present day.
Oh yeah, there's lots of victims that are out there. In fact, I made a list of possible victims that I was able to determine just from looking at that stuff and from reading the book and from some other stuff that happened. I mean, in 2011, I want to say, Cynthia Vigil did a press conference where they released the photo of a woman that they found on a fake ID that David Parker Ray had created with a woman's photo on there, and they believe she might be a victim. And they released her photo, and they were asking if anybody could come forward.
Last things to add, can you add your YouTube channel? And
Sure. If you want to check out the documentary, just check out NightDocs, one word, on YouTube. So yeah, NightDocs is the channel. It's only been a couple of months. It's still just getting started. It's got a good number of people that have kind of come on board, and it's been really, really fun. Been having a great time with this channel so far. This is definitely the darkest topic that I've covered yet, and it'll be a little while before I do anything related to serial killers again. I want to move on to some other topics. The next video that I came out with after that was about the Visit Eroda viral marketing campaign for Harry Styles' new album that kind of bamboozled the entire ARG community online into thinking there was some sort of really well-funded new ARG to get on board with, and turned out to be a viral marketing campaign for One Direction, basically. And it was really, really funny, honestly. And the video itself is the polar opposite of the David Parker Ray documentary. I mean, it's made to be funny. I've got some really large other YouTube creators on there. I've got Nexpo, I've got Loey Lane, I've got Barely Sociable, I've got Nefarious TV on there, and it was just a fun chance for us all to let our hair down for a little bit and laugh about something really funny that happened where, you know, we all got kind of duped by Harry Styles, really, and it was just really, really funny, and it was a lot of fun to make, and it was kind of the medicine I needed after doing the David Parker Ray documentary.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you very much for this conversation, and I wish you a good night.
All right, man.